You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Well, hello, everybody. It's Charlie doing the intro this time. That's right. It's not Michael. It's me. Hey, y'all. Volume 2 of the Arcane Carolinas book series is available on Amazon now. It's written by Michael with a foreword by me. You should check it out. We will be appearing live at Arcana in Durham, North Carolina on September 26th for our Spooky Season Spectacular. We hope to see you there. It is a ticketed event, but the tickets are still free. We really want to keep that accessible to everyone. So for fire code safety, we have to ticket it, but we're going to keep them free. A link to that will be in the show notes or on social media. Additionally, I will be at the Southern Gothic Festival put on by the Kershaw County Library in South Carolina on October 18th. More information for that will be available on our social media pages as well. And you might be asking, Charlie, why are you doing the intro on this episode? You never do the intro on these episodes. Michael's much calmer and more soothing when he does it. What are you doing? Well, I'm not on the rest of this episode. And I wanted to say hi and have a happy spooky season. This was recorded at a live event that I was unable to make due to prior commitments and engagements that will be revealed at a later date. It's so mysterious. Anyway, Michael did a great job of bringing friends together and carrying on without me. And I just wanted to express my gratitude to him for that and say, I think it's a really good episode. I hope you like it too. All right. Toodaloo.
I'm Michael G. Williams. I am your co-host for this episode of Arcane Carolinas Case Files. Normally, I start by saying I'm multi-award-winning novelist and single award-winning podcaster, Michael G. Williams. So that's my introduction. Please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey there, everybody. I am Fiona W. Dunn, and I am a North Carolina-based independent comics creator and artist. And I am one of the two creators of Tarheel Tales of Terror, which is an ongoing comics project retelling spooky North Carolina folk tales as comics.
I first encountered Tarheel Tales of Terror when my husband and I saw your booth at Festival of Legends in Apex in April of 2024. And just like right out of the gate, I was just immediately in love with it. And so I just have to say, like, it is so good. And people who like Arcane Carolinas would love this comic. I actually reread the first issue just today, just to like make sure that I refreshed my memory. And both the writing and the art are so good. Like, so many comic books, in my experience, really lean in one direction or the other. Even great comics, you know. But at the moment, I'm listening to a different podcast talk about the Alan Moore comic From Hell. And like, one of the points they make is, yeah, it's extremely intricately written, but so much of the storytelling in it is like so visual. You know, the art is so powerful in that story. And I really felt like Tarheel Tales of Terror is one of those really rare books where like both parts of it are so important and the writing is so clever. The stories are so well told. The art is gorgeous. Tell us a little about the legends that are in that first issue.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Like, so many compliments right off the bat. And I'm really pleased to hear you say the writing and art are like working together so well. I have more to say about that at some point, our process there. But the two stories we did in issue 1, we have a story that is a traditionally Black Gullah story from down on sort of the southeastern coast of the state of North Carolina called the Boo Hag. That's probably my favorite of those first two that we did, not least of all because the idea for the whole project spun out of a dinner theater project that my writing partner, Jeremy Close, and I worked on together, where we were doing like single storyteller presentations of like spooky folklore over dinner. And the Boo Hag was the story I got to tell.
That is amazing. What an amazing concept.
I think coming out of like African folklore storytelling tradition, it just feels so offbeat to the Western storytelling perspective because you get right into it. You think you know where the story's going. You got this like young guy who's unlucky in love, looking for a wife. And, you know, this woman in his community is like, oh, I know somebody. And then next thing you know, it's just this hard pivot into complete horror as he catches his new bride, like using a spinning wheel to spin her skin off. It's horrible.
I loved that particularly, and that's one of the most beautiful, in a horror sense. That's maybe the word I'm looking for is impressive. That's one of the most impressive pages in the entire comic because you get this character's experience of like literally walking around the corner, and there's the Boo Hag dispensing with her skin. And we've done an episode about Boo Hags, I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe something like that. Really, really love that legend. That's one of my favorite legends from the Carolinas. So I'm so excited to see that. But your telling of it really gets at the visceral horror of the story. I guess literally visceral, come to think of it. The way that is such a great, creepy story, but it's also body horror and it's also gross and scary. And you really feel for the main character in that story. I just really enjoyed that.
And so then the second story that we did, I thought it was an interesting pairing. Firstly, because both stories have to do with marriage and weddings. And then secondly, because the Boo Hag is such a supernatural story, but then the Rattlesnake Honeymoon is almost more of a thriller. There's not a supernatural element to it. It's like, maybe this really happened to somebody, and that's where this legend is coming from. And it's just this whole like man versus nature, the hubris of assuming you know what's going on in any given place kind of thing. And you just got this like newlywed couple moving into the house that the groom has built for them, that he's built on top of this big flat rock that seems like it's a great, foundation for their home. Turns out to be pitted with holes. And that's where a mess of rattlesnakes are overwintering, and the warmth of this couple's first fire in their home brings them all out, and they just, not only terrorize the couple, but kill the groom.
Yeah. I grew up in the mountains. I actually grew up about, if I am correct on where the original location in which that legend supposedly happened actually happened, I don't know. But if I'm correct about where that happened, then I grew up about 20 minutes away from it. And also, I love that one is not at all supernatural. It's like such a great example of the cautionary tale legend, which is always one of my favorite types of legend, where there's a real moral of like, hey, when something seems a little too good to be true, when the natural environment around you has plenty about it to suggest that there might be a problem, then listen up.
Yeah. And a fun little detail that I got to do from the art side, knowing that we were doing both these stories in one volume, is when I was designing the human appearance of the Boo Hag on the page, she has this dress. It's like an 1840s style dress, but I looked into Gullah textiles that they are still using like up to this day culturally, and those like really striking geometric patterns. And I saw an opportunity to design the patterns on her dress to resemble rattlesnake scales.
Damn, I'm going to reread that immediately upon finishing this interview.
And I rendered that very complex pattern so many times because I thought that was just like such a fun little tie together of the two stories.
That's great. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Cannot wait to look at it again because I really loved both of these stories. You mentioned that there's a process here that you wanted to talk about. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, my partner on the project is Jeremy Close, who I have known since I was in high school. I got into historic reenacting as a hobby, and he was a member of the group I got involved with called Historic Interpretations. And so we've worked together on all these different reenactment events over the years. And after I graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design and came back to the area, he approached me about doing this Tarheel Tales project based on the dinner theater we had done together. The interesting thing there is that I went through the whole sequential art program at SCAD, and so I had instruction in not just art, but also writing. And usually the way things go in comics is you either have someone doing everything, that kind of graphic novel, jack of all trades thing, or you have this breakdown of writer, pencils, inks, colors, all as separate phases of the workflow in stuff like the Marvel and DC comics creation process.
Yeah.
But I've enjoyed working with Jeremy because what we end up doing is co-writing the scripts that I'm then drawing from. And so we get to sit down and we have, versions of the story that we are adapting. And, we say, here's how many pages we think we want to do this in. And we start from like sort of this outline of like, okay, what needs to happen on each page? How much space do we want to leave for things? And then getting down more and more granular into like, okay, how many panels? What goes in each panel? Can we tie it into something else? And so I get to sit there in the writing stage with Jeremy, and like I can sort of visualize roughly what I want to do with each page, but then I've also got someone else to bounce off of when it comes to like, how do we phrase this just right? Especially dealing with something like the Boo Hag, where I know that we're engaging with Black culture and both of us as white writers to be like, do we need to check in? Are we getting these details right? Are we being as sensitive as we can with this?
Mm-hmm.
We got into the weeds on some particular historical details and finding references to make sure that the things I'm drawing are as close to historically accurate as they can be while being like a fictional horror folktale. Jeremy is a layperson in the Episcopal Church, so we even like got really specific about like the verbiage of the wedding vows that you see in the two stories.
I actually was going to ask about that because the language used is very similar, but not exactly the same as what one of us might observe at a wedding today in a church. And I had meant to ask, is that something that was based on a difference in language historically? So that is fascinating.
I wish Jeremy was on here because he could have gotten way more specific. But yes, that is looking at historic, both the, I guess, branch of Christianity you would be seeing prevalent in North Carolina at our different points in time, and then how the traditions would have been different at that point in time from what they are in those branches today.
That sort of historical detail, I'm sure that there are people who would say that that does not matter. I would disagree vehemently with those people because I feel like that accuracy really does carry through in sort of the passion that y'all as creators show for the work. And I feel like that is important for accurately communicating that time period to the reader. The reader may or may not ever stop to think, is this an accurately researched example of the phrasing that would have been used in this one moment out of this entire story? But the entire story ends up, as we read them, sort of like get reconstructed in our mind, become a part of how we think about that time. And so to make sure that that's historically accurate is so important. I wrote a series of historical urban fantasy novels, and my editor and my publisher kept putting a note saying, I'll go back and check whether this person was real. The next day, oh, wow, this person was real. This is like a throwaway character that somebody just like walked past on the street. But that kind of stuff, people who are into history are into knowing that that's legit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you come down to like, is it needed for the story or not, you sort of have to take a bigger step back and think, why are we telling these stories? Because on the surface level, like, of course, they're delightfully macabre, creepy folk tales. They give you that shiver down your spine. They're a lot of fun. But I think for me and Jeremy both, these kinds of folk tales make a really nice on-ramp for people to get interested in history. And like, we live in North Carolina. These are North Carolina stories. You get interested in the history of the place where you live, ideally. And so then bringing accuracy to the table where it makes sense in these stories. You know, like you're saying, people may not be thinking actively about it, but they're still taking in something from the story. Maybe the specificity of what we are writing and drawing here sparks their curiosity. They go look something up. They learn something new. There's lots of little details I included that if you took the time to Google, you could end up down a whole rabbit hole. Like, we have the hanging glass bottles in the Boo Hag that are this old Gullah tradition for warding off evil spirits. I wish, in places we were in color so we could have gotten the blue paint on the houses.
Stuff like that really does matter. It's so funny. We also did an episode about bottle trees and talked about that coming from the hanging blue bottles and the hanging blue glass and the blue pottery and things like that from the Kingdom of Congo. And that is so phenomenally important. I just really appreciate y'all's perspective on the importance of how these stories are told and presented. And I love the desire to inspire people to be interested in the history of the place we live. One of the things Charlie and I say all the time, every time we're looking at any place in the Carolinas, we always end up saying stories like this are right around the corner, no matter where you are. Every place has a story, and every place has a weird story. Every place has a horror story. Every town has that house that people stay away from, or the story of the person under the bridge, or whatever. Every town has its own legends. These things are important to us. And I think inspiring people to show interest in that is so important. At the back of the first volume, you mentioned having first encountered the Rattlesnake Honeymoon story in North Carolina Legends. That's one of my favorite books from childhood. Bought that in a museum shop or something, someplace as a kid, and just could not get enough of it. Read it until it fell apart. My husband found my copy of it, and then we re-glued all the pages in and everything so that now it's readable again. Do not feel pressured to say yes and share anything. Let me be clear. Have you had any experiences with any of the stories or types of stories that y'all tell in this series that drew your interest to it, or have you always been drawn to these topics regardless?
I think I'm in an interesting camp, in the broader category of people who enjoy horror and ghost stories and things. I've always been interested in them. I remember a book I read to pieces as an elementary schooler that was vampire myths from around the world, right?
Yeah.
Always loved mythology, always loved, kind of spooky things. I've gotten into horror films more as an adult. It used to be a little too much for me as a kid. But then on the other hand, I've never had a supernatural experience. I was going to school in Savannah, Georgia, and everyone's it's so haunted. It's so haunted. I never saw or heard anything. I'm a little bit of a skeptic in that respect. But I think, ultimately horror ends up being this kind of space of psychological insight. And then folk horror in particular is so interesting because it's that collective psychology of all the people in an area and this mass perspective on what is scary that I think is just so very cool.
One of the things that I love about legends and folklore is that it does not require dogma to enjoy. We don't have to believe, quote unquote, in something to see the value in the story, to realize the value in perpetuating the story and in preserving the story and figuring out a new way to retell it so that it is around for other people to enjoy, creating opportunities for somebody else to hear them for the first time. And none of that, valuing that does not require that we also believe that it's literally true. It has a ton of cultural value regardless. That's one of the things I love. It does not demand that we give up on critical thinking in order to appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. All these stories we were working with sort of originally got compiled for that dinner theater project. And so going into volume 2 here, we've got another 2 stories that are still off that original list of stuff. I'm not sure if we will branch out into stories beyond that set for what will probably be the 3rd and final volume. We kind of haven't settled on what our theme for that will be. But the second one, we're doing ghostly travelers because we've got a story about Lydia, the Phantom Hitchhiker. And this is one of those stories that crops up all over the place, not just in North Carolina, but we certainly have our own version.
Absolutely.
And then we've got the ghost ships of Ocracoke, the flaming ships. And just go ahead and pour one out for me when I get around to drawing all of that rigging. But it's going to be so cool when it's done.
I don't have an artistic bone in my body. I would not even begin to know how to do that. And I definitely appreciate that it's got to be just a ton of finely detailed work. And so I look forward to enjoying it. I will make sure to linger over it so that you will know it is appreciated, because the artwork in volume 1 is just exquisite, just astoundingly good.
And honestly, I'm excited for volume 2. I think I'm continuing to improve as an artist. I think it's going to be even better. I'm very excited for whenever I finally finish it, because of course, doing all this detail, I have never once accurately judged my timeline.
I've got a couple of publishers that would tell you that they would tell you that I have been there. Yeah, no problem there. What other projects have either of you worked on?
Jeremy is currently a layperson working for the local Episcopal diocese. So he is with one of the local churches helping them run their day-to-day stuff. Before that, he was actually doing costume at Raleigh Little Theater.
Oh.
Did that for a while and has been, like I mentioned earlier, a longtime collaborator with me as, I guess, hobbyist historical reenactors, but very committed hobbyists, working with a local group called Historic Interpretations. I'm on the board currently of that organization, and he was on the board for a long time there. And then for my part, in addition to Tarheel Tales of Terror, have a webcomic called Verdancy that is a sort of medieval fantasy horror coming of age story. Haven't updated it in some time because I've been working on these projects. It's very dear to my heart. It's based on a short story I wrote a while back, and I do want to finish it eventually. And then also on the work front, also with the Episcopal Church, very funny because I'm not a churchgoer at all, but because of Jeremy's connection there, I'm working on my second project in collaboration with the Swindell Committee from the local Episcopal Diocese, doing what we're calling illustrated or graphic Bible studies. The first one we did back in 2019 was about anti-racism, and I'm currently working with them on one about re-examining Bible stories to identify queer experiences in those narratives.
That is fascinating. Do you have links for all of those? Because I'd like to include links to those in the show notes.
Yeah, so the anti-racism one was produced, and I have that you can read in its entirety on my website, so I can give you a link to my website where that comic is up and available. The queer experiences one is still in production, so I'm back and forth between working on Tarheel Tales of Terror and working on this graphic Bible study thing, which is really interesting to be going back and forth between.
I can imagine that there's a little authorial whiplash there, you know? I know a lot of writers who work in multiple genres whose general approach is, well, I'll write a sci-fi novel, and then I'll write a horror novel, and then I'll write a sci-fi novel, and then I'll write a horror novel. But, you can switch genres and still tell very similar stories. Those are very different stories.
And as a sidebar, I've been talking about how much I care about historical accuracy in my storytelling, and I keep being frustrated with the Bible stories. They are so long ago, we have almost no first-person sources, and so I'm just having to make things up and hope it looks good.
I was told once by an editor, the right amount of research is one Google search farther than a reader will go.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how it is. And you're going to give me links so that I can put those in the show notes. So there will be people will be able to go to the show notes, whatever format you're listening to this in, whatever site you're on, and see the links there. But also, what is your website, just in case, so that people can hear it?
You can find me online at my website, FionaWDunn.art. That is FIONAWDUNN.ART.
And can people buy Tarheel Tales of Terror there, or where should people go to buy them?
Not at present. Right now, all the copies of Tarheel Tales of Terror that are out were either delivered to our Kickstarter backers directly, or I am selling them in person at art markets, but we are working on having a print-on-demand option available for people to buy. And once that's live, that will be linked all over my social media, on the website and everything. But that is still in the works.
Good deal. What art markets, fairs, etc. are you all planning to do for the rest of the year, or is that too long a list to list?
I wish it was longer. The art market scene is a little bit funky. Right now, the only thing that is for sure on my calendar coming up will be in December at Sanderson High School when they have their holiday fair. I will be there.
Oh, great. Okay. But that means people have plenty of time to plan to be there.
Absolutely.
I cannot overstate how much I enjoyed that first volume. My husband saw it sitting there and said, hey, you should check it out. We both loved it. It is always such a pleasure to talk to other people who love these stories, love these legends, love to do whatever we can to preserve them. Well, like you said, to create on-ramps for these stories, for people to encounter these stories and really come to love them. It's just so important. I just really, really appreciate what y'all are doing. It's so good. I feel like I'm just saying the same things over and over again, but that's because I can't figure out a way to phrase it that expresses how much I loved reading it.
Thank you so much. It's just delightful to hear from somebody. So much of comics work is done in a room by myself. So it's just great to know that it is reaching the audience it was written and illustrated for.
As a novelist, I definitely know what you mean. For sure. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we sign off?
No, I think I'm good. But if you're interested in all of this work, if you want to keep up with the ongoing progress of Volume 2 and eventually Volume 3, you will be able to see work and updates on my website that I talked about. That also contains links to my other social media like Blue Sky, Tumblr. Technically, I still have an Instagram, not that I update it much. And whenever there is news and updates on any of those projects, that will go out on my website and on my social media. So if you just want to stay abreast of the project, that's where to do it.
At the moment, Blue Sky is like my favorite platform. I'm hoping that you're just like at Fiona W. Dunn or something like that.
I am. Yes. My handle everywhere you want to find me is going to be at Fiona W. Dunn. That middle initial distinguishes me from the couple of other Fiona Dunns in Britain.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely. Yeah. And then Michael G. Williams. Yeah, I definitely know how that is too. So that's great. I was asking partly so that people can go follow and partly so that I can go follow as soon as this is done.
Absolutely.
I really hope the folks can catch up with y'all at an art market somewhere, follow you on social media, keep an eye out for the next volume and whatever means are available to get it. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a treat to come and be able to talk about the project.
With that, I, being the expert at audio stuff, am going to stop recording.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind the scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening. Normally Charlie does the interview. Oh my God. You're really like not getting the best Arcane Carolinas. But okay, so